welcome everyone. This is the first of these sorts of online regional events which we're hosting in the PPN in the Southeast. So it's great to see people joining us today. In terms of housekeeping, we're recording the session today because we're anticipating that there might be people who are going to want to catch up with it later. So do just be aware of that. We hope that you will be interacting and making a contribution, but just be mindful of that. If for any reason there's anything that you do say that then you feel uncomfortable with being shared or recorded, then just drop Lindsay or I a line and we can see what we can do about that. But I'm hoping that shouldn't be too much of an issue. I think the recording has started already. So I'm Bill Tiplady. I'm the co-chair of the Southeast PPN. I can see that Adrian, my fellow co-chair, is out there in the audience with our super pale purple Psychological Professions Week teams backgrounds. I'm not going to say that much. I'm not going to say anything really about the subject matter of today's event. I'm going to leave that to our speakers who'll be able to do so, I'm sure, much better than I could. But I just wanted to say something about the PPN for anyone who's not familiar with who we are and what we do. So we're a regional network connecting up psychological professions and others. Oh, super. There's Tony, who's arrived in this meeting, having struggled with getting into the wrong meeting. Hey, Tony, you're in the right place now. Good to see you. Sorry about the struggle there. So we aim to kind of connect the psychological professions and give a common voice. And we work on a number of projects. So we've got a big project at the moment about a career map for the psychological professions. I hope people may be aware of that, where we're trying to make something that's relevant both for existing psychological professionals, but also for people who are aspiring to enter the expanding number of professions. We have a quarterly workforce council where we try and connect up people in the psychological professions with Health Education England and the wider NHS system. And we have a fortnightly newsletter where we try and keep our members informed about developments that might be relevant to them and the work of the PPN. And the other bit of work that I forgot about with the excitement of Tony arriving was we've got a big piece of work about expanding diversity of access into the psychological professions, which we're hosting here in the Southeast, which I think is a really important thing for us to be working on. If you haven't already joined, and hopefully you should have been prompted to as you registered for this event, I've pasted a link into the chat, which would help you to do that. Please share that with anyone who you think it might be relevant to. A particular date for your diaries, as advertised in Adrian and my background, is Psychological Professions Week. So that's coming up from the 14th to the 18th of November this year. As usual, there's a kind of programme of online events that you can join, which cover a whole range of different topics. And again, I've put in the chat the link to register for that week. So do take a look at that. So back to today's event. I'm really delighted we've got such a great trio of speakers with us today. I want to particularly thank Robin Clare. I'm not sure if Robin is with us or not, but Robin is our former assistant who did a lot of work in developing this event and coming up with a topic along with Sharon, who definitely is here, and I can see her, Sharon Galliford, one of our fantastic experts by experience, who were really instrumental in thinking about the topic for this event and helping us link up with the right speakers. So we're going to hear today from Ryan, who's going to talk first about the work the BPS is doing in relation to climate change and the wider policy context. We're going to hear from Mayya, who'll be talking with us about her own research on the emotional impact of climate change and the implications for psychological work. And then finally from Michal, who's going to be talking about eco-psychology and the power of nature-based approaches, and encourage us to sample a little bit of a nature-based approach here in the session. We're really grateful to all of them for speaking. We're going to be making time for questions after each speaker, but feel free to put your questions into the chat. We'll try and respond to those as best we can going along, and hopefully we'll also be able to hear from some contributions as well. We're leaving cameras on for now. If we run into kind of bandwidth problems, we might switch them off, but we're hoping that that will work okay for us to be able to see one another, because that makes for a better experience all round. So thanks all for joining us. I'm going to hand over then to Ryan, who's going to kick us off for today. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Great to be with you. Hopefully make this interesting and don't tell you stuff you already know, which I'm always nervous about with topics like climate change, which are obviously, people are very passionate about and know quite a bit about, and probably some of you probably know more than me. I'm also really nervous because, a few years ago I went to a conference to give a speech, and one of my sort of psychological heroes was in the front row, and it's really hard when someone who knows more than you is in the audience rather than you. So Tony Wainwright is here, and Tony has been probably the most active psychologist in the BPS over the last decade or so on this. So if I don't know anything, Tony's definitely going to know it. So I hope I do you justice, Tony. Anyway, let me get cracking. I'm gonna just share some slides, hopefully. Okay. There we go. Right. So today I'm basically speaking to you, I guess, because of the fact that I'm on the DCP exec and I have this sustainability champion role. So, but I have rather unconsciously put these slides on my work emails, work slide deck. So I'm certainly not speaking to you as a Central and Northwest London employee. So try not to take that too much into account. So I want to just talk about something, what's happening on a sort of professional level. A little bit about what you can do, not really one slide. But more, I want to talk about what's going on in your organizations that you're connected to, because I think that's where the biggest impact can be had. So let me get going. I'm presuming everybody knows the science of climate change and how, sort of risky we are at the moment. We're very skirting on the edge of a really horrific turning point, a tipping point when it comes to the climate. And this isn't just about carbon and global, temperature rise. There's also, species destruction, destruction of the oceans. Soil is a massive issue, which we don't talk enough about, I think. So there's so much here we've got to do, and I have teenage children, and it's a really very concrete thing for them, and they think about this and worry about it a lot. So lots of declarations of emergency have been done by all sorts of organisations, including the NHS. So if you're interested and work in the NHS, there's quite a lot of work going on at a very high level. Some of this is happening, obviously, at a level that might be in your organisation. So that's one thing to start thinking about, I think. The NHS delivered this document. It's quite high level, aiming for net zero in the NHS by 2040, but still looking for pretty high level reductions in carbon emissions within the next 10 years, an 80% reduction, which is pretty ambitious, I would think. There have also been other groups within the NHS doing things and declaring things. So the allied health professions very recently put out a strategy. This is not a sustainability strategy, but it had sustainability as one of its core targets, and sort of reiterating this aim of trying to get to zero emissions by 2040. Now, there are also things beyond the NHS which are worth knowing about. So there's a UK Health Alliance on climate change, and they put on various events. They collate information, and if you're interested in this area, this website is really very good to visit and have a look at, and give you ideas and resources that you can use. There's also this group which is called the Climate Psychology Alliance. I'm not too familiar with them, but they are, but that's available. And again, there's events and resources that you can tap into there. I don't speak for the ACP, but I would like to say that I really endorse their strong position they've taken on the climate, and they have put out a number of statements supporting their members to take action and to speak up and to make climate change a really important part of their professional lives. In the BPS, we are trying to work with the ACP, so we're not trying to have some sort of competition going on, but that we work together to think about and do the things that make the most impact. So just to say a little bit about the APA, they've done quite a lot of work, and I actually think we in the UK could pick up some tips from them. So there's a number of documents they've produced. They've got a whole strategy, and recently published some shorter versions which you can download from their website. So if you really want to dig into this topic in quite some detail, the APA website is really very good. So let's talk about BPS then. So I think I'm just gonna be honest. I think the BPS really could be doing more, and our position, I'm not sure, is strong enough and clear enough. We know, particularly from our younger members, that they're really interested in this and want a clearer, louder voice on this. But for all sorts of reasons, that's been difficult for the BPS to take this up. However, something is changing, and they've recently set up, a group. Actually, let me just go forward a little bit. So we're going to be setting up this thing called the Climate and Environment Action Coordinating Group, CEAC, which is very hard to remember. And this will be a BPS-wide action group. There will be subgroups, and Tony will know we've been, working together to set up a DCP version of this, so that we can look across all the faculties in the DCP and all the subgroups and bring all that work and thinking together, so that we can start to highlight what's actually been going on, and therefore, I guess, get people excited, and also, to highlight the fact that things can be done. So this hasn't actually started yet, but we are hoping that it will be off the ground in the next couple of months. That's certainly my aim. Let me just go back a bit. So if you're wanting to find out a bit more about what you can do as a psychologist in terms of climate and environmental work, on the DCP subsection of the BPS website, there is this. I haven't got the screenshot of this, but these are there's a whole bunch of different things and approaches you might take as a practitioner psychologist. Now, if you are on the website, you'll be able to click on all these 16 different topics, and under each of them there's an explanation, there's connections to other papers, websites, etc. So it's really it's very rich, and I think sort of unfortunately not accessed enough by BPS members. So I would encourage you to really go and have a look at it, and give yourself an hour or so to really work through it. This is Tony and Annie Mitchell, who's a clinical psychologist, have worked really hard on this over the years, and you know, there's a lot here a lot of food for thought, but also practical things that we can start to do. Right, let me move on a bit then. Another thing to say is that the DCB conference is actually this week on Thursday and Friday, and there's a number of presentations, including one, you know, that I think Tony's leading one, and Lucy Johnson's also doing one on the power threat meaning framework and how that connects to climate work. And in fact was part of a group that published this paper just last month on applying the PTMF framework to climate and ecological issues, showing that, you know, that the climate is a force of power that affects people's lives really deeply and often quite subtly, which you know, can mean that we don't realize its effects. So I would recommend that you try and get a hold of that paper and read it. It's very, very good. And also, if you're going to the conference, check out these sessions. They're definitely going to broaden your outlook on things. Mention that. Just want to say something about HCPC. So I can't remember the exact dating of this, but there was a case with the HCPC that involved a psychologist who was arrested during as I understand it, during a climate protest, and so that, you know, if you do fall foul of the law, you are meant to refer yourself to the HCPC. But on consideration, the HCPC decided not to pursue that not to pursue any action against them in relation to conduct. So so I think we all, you know, thought that was a very important step, that you know, that you don't well, obviously if you do certain things while you're protesting, if you really do something very illegal, you do run some risks with your registration, but just protesting itself is not something that should risk your professional career. So I found that really encouraging, and I think it should allow people to be a little less worried about being, you know, very active in terms of the action they take on climate. So I've got one slide on personal action. I mean, I think you all know this stuff. There's various things we can all do. You know, try not to drive cars. Try to, you know, change our diets, perhaps, you know, use renewable energy in public transport, etc., etc. So I'm not even going to go into that too much, but there is stuff we can do as a person. But today I mostly want to talk about what you can do as a professional. So the NHS, if you work for the NHS is one of the largest producers of CO2 in the UK, and possibly generates as much as 5% of all this carbon in the UK. So that is a massive proportion, and if you think about it, the tiny amount of carbon that you personally produce, you know, is absolutely dwarfed by these numbers. So as much as you should do personal things to mitigate your impact on the environment, if you can affect your organization, then you are going to make a much bigger impact. So what happened to me about 2 years ago was, in my organization, was that I'd been sort of asking questions about what we were doing on the environment when I was contacted by a group of clinicians from one particular hospital which we ran, to say that they had concerns and they were doing things but didn't seem to feel like the organization was doing anything. And so I started to try to figure out what was going on in the organization, and having conversations with execs in the organization about what they were doing. And then I connected these frontline staff with the relevant person, and they started to communicate their concerns. And this really had a really significant impact on the trust, and it catalyzed a set of events which have now led to the organization employing a full-time dedicated climate change project manager, and various other sort of subparts which I won't bore you with, but looking at our food strategy, our building strategy, our transportation strategy. So it really made me realize that the power of frontline staff is significant. So if you are interested in making an impact in your organization, what I would suggest, find some like-minded people, find some people you work with who have the same opinions as you. It doesn't have to be 100 people, just 5 or 6 of you could be it. And I would start, by writing. I would write to the chief exec and say, you're concerned about this. What is happening? What's going on? And if you don't get much response, start lobbying the other execs. They know they're meant to be doing stuff. So when you ask these questions, it isn't going to surprise them. If you find that things aren't moving quite as quickly as you'd like, you could try the non-execs. They're often a bit more willing to tackle the execs in your trust, and ask them what they think and what they want to do. And if your trust has a plan, ask to see it, interrogate it, see whether you think it's ambitious enough, whether it's something that will make a difference, and suggest things to go in there, to go with it. I mean, there's always more that can be done, and often these more things are not all that difficult. So other things that I would say is, if you are doing things, in the organization, certainly try to publicize them. Try to tell other people that you're doing them. This can be very empowering to other people who are thinking, oh, maybe we should do this. So, for example, in our trust, one set of people started doing a gardening project. This was with patients, and that has now, set off a string of other similar projects around the organization, and it's almost a bit like a competition about who can have the nicest garden. But it's both sort of empowering for the service users, but also is clearly going to have some positive impacts. I would say do the things that really matter to you. What are you motivated by? What's the thing that excites you and would get you going? I would also say don't just try to do the easy things. I mean, I think some of the things that we need to tackle are things that need to be worked out over several years, and I'm thinking here about food particularly, which is a complex issue to tackle. Currently working on our food strategy in our organization, and it's not easy, but we have to systematically improve the food we give to people, because that's good for their health, and good organic food is going to improve people's recovery, speed it up. We know that there's enough science on that. But if we're talking also about equipment and changes like that, then some of that is not going to happen just instantly. And I've heard of places that are fundraising to buy solar panels for their buildings where the organisation can't afford it. Once you get the basic solar panel infrastructure in place, you can add more panels later. It's not like it's you have to raise all the money in one go. So you can think about trying to do this over a period of time. You can ask local residents and other other stakeholders perhaps to help out. We've done a piece of work around walking aids in our trust, trying to get them back and recycle them, because what's been happening is we're giving out all sorts of different walking aids, and then often they end up just sitting in someone's corner of their lounge, not being used anymore. So we've got a project going trying to get those returned to us. We'll clean them, and then they can go back out for use again. So that's just a couple of things. Just one more thing to say. Just back to the BPS and the ACP again. Whatever these organisations are doing, these are the sort of organisations, obviously, that I'm mostly interested in, but there are other ones. But you can lobby these organisations too, and I would particularly be very pleased if you did this for the BPS. Put pressure on these organisations to do more. Write into the magazines or the whatever forums or publications they've got, and say, I see this happening, but I think we should be doing more. I think we should be doing this on this. The more members speak up and are clear and strong in what they want, the more those organizations and professional societies will listen and start to do things. So, just because you might think, oh, I'm just this, simple member, that doesn't matter. You actually will you will have more influence than you imagine. And behind the scenes, people like Tony and myself were pushing, trying to get the organizations to do more stuff. So if you're helping on in your small way, it's all gonna add up, and that's I think for the best. So lastly, here's my summary. I'll draw this to a close. So we really need our professional societies to work with us to make change. Do your bit as an individual, but if you can and you want to make significant change, then get active in your organization and put pressure on them to do things to make a really big impact. So let me. Somehow, have I stopped sharing? Or
no, not yet.
Okay. I don't know how I've managed to do that.
So whilst Ryan's wrestling with PowerPoint, there you go, it's done now. Do people have comments, thoughts, questions? I think I would definitely underline what Ryan is saying about the importance of, kind of people power and speaking up about this. I think my experience of the NHS is that, with so many potential priorities, things get focused depending on to what extent, it's clear that they're a priority for people around in the system. And I think this is something where there's some powerful levers, as Tony has highlighted in the chat there, but actually, trust boards and things like that will be really motivated if they can see this is something that matters to their staff and to people who use their services. So interested to hear your thoughts on that. Tony, you've got your hand raised and we'll come to you first.
Thanks, Ryan. That's really a good overview, I think. The thing I was going to add was that the BABCP, the British Association of Behavioural Cognitive Psychotherapists, at their conference had some very useful presentations about climate change. Mandy Coles in particular took a lead at the conference, and the closing keynote was speaking about the role that the BABCP may be able to play in supporting people who are feeling the pressure of what's going on in the world at the moment. So, you know, the other thing is our skills as counsellors and you know, all the various psychological ideas that we can have to help people are a key thing in how we engage with the trust organisation. So board members are also people who are worried about the climate crisis, about their kids and about their future, as well as all the other crises we're facing. So we've got a lot of skills here. And I was also thinking the other thing about, I love the idea about frontline workers getting in front with a chief executive, and having talked to Sharon earlier on when we were thinking about this session, you know, if they're experts by experience as well, combined with frontline workers, that would be a very powerful group to go and talk to the chief executive.
That's a brilliant point, Tony. Yes, I should have thought of that. Yes, definitely, definitely.
Other thoughts, other comments? I'm mindful of what you're saying, Tony, that, yeah, there's a wide range of psychological professions out there. For some, the BPS and the ACP will be the obvious organisation, but that, you know, we're representing a whole wider group of professions, each of whom will probably have their own take on this. And certainly we need to be thinking perhaps what we in the PPN can be doing to stitch some of these things together. Any other thoughts or comments or questions for Ryan? Challenges, you know, observations? Otherwise, Mayya, I think you should be starting to get your slides teed up.
Thanks, everyone. I'll be here, and you know, if there's questions later on, I can take them.
Ryan, thank you very, very much. Really greatly appreciated. You can see that look of concentration that only comes when you're trying to figure out how to share something on Teams. It's a very particular facial expression that affects us all. Just because it worked in rehearsal is no guarantee that it will work for real, as we all know to our cost.
It's loading. 1 second.
It's low. There we go. I mean, I think the point that you made, Tony, that actually, you know, trust exec or, you know, very senior people in ICS boards and things like that are just people. I suspect that you know, probably quite a lot of people are really concerned about you know, these issues, but perhaps somehow maybe don't feel that they need some sort of permission to be focusing on them in their job, you know. So actually that's in a way the jump we need to make, that actually it is okay in this instance to translate your personal thoughts about these things into something that you're doing as a legitimate work activity and area of focus, because I suppose traditionally maybe we haven't talked about these things, and that's part of the problem, whereas we do need to bring them into our, you know, our structures and our conversations day to day in the work that we're doing. Right, Mayya, your slides are up, so I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Mayya. I'm a counseling psychologist in training, and I'm passionate about this topic, and my research project is also about climate change. There has been a lot of research recently about climate crisis, which means there's an abundance of information, but hopefully today I can provide you with some insights of how climate change relates to psychology. So just agenda for today. I would like us together to reflect a little bit on our relationship to nature. Then we'll discuss some consequences of climate change on psychological well-being, and also together think of a way forward. I feel like kind of the main purpose of my presentation is to raise awareness of climate change and to start this conversation as psychological professionals. I feel like we need to have those spaces, the more the better, because together we can come up with some solutions and to think together how we deal with this issue in a clinical setting or beyond. I do hope that today we can create a kind of interactive and safe space. I would encourage you to ask me questions, and I also would ask you to reflect on some of the questions as we go along. So before, while I'm briefly introducing my interest in this topic, I would like you to as well share with me whether you have any personal or professional experiences of climate change and in what capacity. If you could just put some answers in a chat box, that would be great. I assume you're here. That means that you are in some way interested in this topic, in climate change, and that would be, I guess, good for me to understand the audience. So my interest in climate change is rooted in my personal relationship with the natural world. Until I moved to London, I lived in the countryside, and nature was my playground when I was growing up. I interacted a lot with insects, plants, animals, and I think that was a pivotal moment for me to form a strong bond with the natural world. And as I was growing up, of course, I became aware of environmental degradation, which caused me feeling upset and concerned. And that ignited further my interest to understand nature-human relationship. In my personal life, I guess I've witnessed climate changes in different places in the world through traveling and seeing how weather changes. And in professional life, as part of my doctorate, I need to devote to do a research project. And once I realized that the topic that I care about can be studied within a psychological context, I decided to devote my research project to that. And I'm in my final stages of finishing thesis, and my research question is about understanding indirect impact of climate change, namely how the information about climate change impacts young climate activists. So let me just check whether anyone shared. No one shared their experiences. That's okay. But if you would like to do that throughout, that would be great. So now moving on to the part of reflecting on our relationship to nature. Because overpopulation, consumerism, economic growth, our life on Earth becomes disproportionate. It seems like we take more than we give back to the planet. Just to give you an example, in less than 50 years, over 60% of wildlife has been lost, and this is very scary numbers. What are the underlying causes of this ecological crisis? Many professionals and research evidence states that it is due to destructive behavior of human beings. And it is true, but what lies underneath this behavior? We find ourselves in this global crisis, and there's no doubt something went wrong with how we relate to our natural world. So just for you to understand, I guess in my view, there are two prevalent views of human and nature relationship. And one view is derived from a field of ecology and also prevalent in Eastern philosophies such as Buddhism, states that humans are interlinked with the external world. This implies a unitary stance where being in the world suggest an embedded existence of humans with nature. However, a more contemporary view, which is used in politics and economics, sees humans as separate from nature, which represents binary view of existence. And from this perspective, the earth, the soil, climate change is all it, and the subject is a human being. So I guess a framework of dualism and reductionism prevails in Western society, which means that we immediately have this discourse of us versus them, and that creates a hierarchical view. And perhaps this view that allows us exploitation of the planet for economic growth, and the sense of separateness fuels this loss of biodiversity. So now I would like you to think.
Just to say, Mayya, you've had quite a lot of things that have come into the chat since, so I don't know if you want to have a look.
Okay, so sharing so some emotions, fear about the future of the world, and I guess personal experiences. Thank you for sharing. This is very important, and I see as well how people, I guess, personally do some actions like becoming vegan and eco-friendly. This is great, a lot of activity. Thank you for sharing. And I guess right now, I would like you to think about your relationship towards the natural world by looking at those photos, which are full of life, beauty, nature, and perhaps also if you're sitting next to the window looking outside and noticing what is around you. Can you share with me what is evoked in you? What do you feel? What are you experiencing looking at these photos? Similarly, please do share it in a chat box, or you could raise a hand and you'll be unmuted and share your experiences.
Sorry, the slides aren't moving.
Do you see like a slide with nature?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Like two pictures, mountains, and then a kind of bay with boats on it. Yeah.
Okay. So kind of looking at those photos, what do you love about being alive? And also, what are you grateful for in nature? If anyone could share. So someone shared that, Ryan, that you love camping and you spend a lot of time in nature. Peace, love, adventure, amazement of nature, so appreciation of nature. I guess what my personal experience, what I'm grateful for nature and what I love about it is the sound of birds. It gives me such a feeling of being alive whenever I hear that. The beauty of nature. Yes, we are part of nature. Yes, thank you. So a lot of positive emotions. And now I guess I will show you another set of photos. And similarly, I would like you to describe to me, how do you feel and what do you notice by looking at, there's a fire in a wild forest, an oil spill in the middle of the ocean, and those two wild animals embracing and looking helpless. For me personally, I guess I feel complete contrast, and that makes me sad looking at those pictures. Sadness, tragedy, guilt, horror. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all this. I guess these two exercises are inspired by Joanna Macy's work, which combines deep ecology and wisdom traditions. And deep ecology is a philosophy that says that humans, we have to radically change our relationship to nature, that we must recognize the nature for its inherent value. And in our fast-paced rhythm of life, sometimes we take things for granted. We're constantly being also bombarded with information about climate change, and all this can feel overwhelming, and inevitably we just disengage. So I think it's very important to make space to acknowledge our own responses to climate crisis in order to be able to offer support or understand perhaps the clients that we're meeting in a therapeutic setting or in a clinical setting. So the first exercise was to practice our gratitude, to bring us back to the present moment, to stimulate love and empathy towards nature. And the second exercise was about honoring our pain, and recognize what is it that we're losing. And I guess the aim of Joanna Macy's work, and she also, based on her work, there are a lot of interesting workshops I would recommend if anyone is interested to attend them. They're very experiential and interesting. So is to emphasize and reestablish human connection to nature, to help people move into a new relationship to the world. And I guess through her work, she tries to highlight that denial, numbness, and inaction are not valid options. So now moving on a little bit, talking about the current picture, the consequences of climate change and what is climate change. And it is a complex of complex issues. And I guess previously the research has been focused on understanding the direct impacts of climate change. And I'll speak a little bit about indirect as well. But given that also the focus has been understanding on environmental degradation, but given the interconnectedness between humans and natural world, it means that human health inevitably also be impacted. And the consequences of climate change might have different levels of impact. It can impact physical health by creating injuries, deaths, chronic diseases, which then in turn interlinks with mental health by causing depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder. And I guess in combination, then it influences community health in general by creating disrupted sense of belonging, loss of community cohesion, forced migration, which is all very distressing. Here's another diagram, which I really like. It visually represents all the different levels of climate change consequences. At the top, there are 3 different types of changes, which are gradual changes, acute and chronic. And they either impact people directly or indirectly, and it's on a continuum. So research also makes a distinction between direct impacts, which are caused by first-hand experiences of extreme weather events, and indirect, for example, just by viewing images of environmental degradation means that you might have some psychological distress as well. Who is at risk of climate change? Unfortunately, everyone and everywhere, but some people are more vulnerable to the potential impacts, such as elderly, young people, people with chronic diseases, or those who are predisposed to mental health issues, which means that climate change creates inequalities. And ironically, it's often those who contribute the least to climate change that suffer the most. And that places climate change into social justice agenda, which is, I think, is important for to notice and be aware of for psychological professionals. So this slide is a little bit packed, but I guess my intention here is not to go deeply into discussing and evaluating different research studies, but instead to just signpost you and make you aware of existing literature and the main debates out there. So as I've mentioned recently, there has been focus on understanding and acknowledging indirect impacts of climate change, which means that not only people that live in certain areas or experience firsthand climate change events are impacted, but those who just, view images also have been reporting intense emotional responses, such as sense of helplessness, lack of control, grief. And I guess this point is very important to consider when we are working with our clients in a therapy room. It is interesting to note that despite the global scope of climate change, beliefs, opinions, and also emotional responses vary. And the discrepancy could be explained by the fact that modernized society lives in urbanized areas where people spend little time in nature, perhaps, and are not geographically close to the consequences of climate change. So people often perceive climate change as something distant, threat that will not happen in their lifetime. And I guess a combination of these factors contributes to psychological distance and emotional disconnection from the environment. So as I've mentioned, a variety of emotional responses were identified in response to climate change and its awareness, such as depression, anger, sadness. And I guess my own study as well demonstrated that my participants, my young climate activists, have experienced an emotional storm, which means there are a spectrum of different and sometimes conflicting emotions. But in attempt to understand this emotional responses to climate change, it prompted the creation of new kind of terms and lexicon, and such as, I guess you hear a lot about eco-anxiety, eco-paralysis, eco-grief, which are referred to as eco-emotions. And I guess the debate is in the literature is whether they're helpful, those terms, to describe complex responses to the existential threats, and there might be useful in order to communicate, validate, and acknowledge the distress. But perhaps using these particular labels, there might also be a risk of placing human subjective experience within a medical framework, and using clinical terms to describe adaptive responses might create a feeling that there's something wrong and therefore needs to be fixing. So I guess that's something to bear in mind. Also, the popular media and research literature repeatedly focus on climate anxiety as the most prevalent response to the climate crisis. The research, however, is inconclusive, as some have argued that eco-anxiety is a possible threat to mental well-being, and may interfere with daily functioning, while others did not find a significant correlation between eco-anxiety and poor mental health. Also, to date, there is no clear measurement of climate anxiety, and some research have tried to operationalize this concept, this term, and they kind of suggested that it's perhaps a combination of negative emotions such as fear, worry, anger, guilt, shame, hopelessness, all together. But for me, it raises a question whether kind of the research community is risking to simplify, reduce, and perhaps solidify some complex emotional experiences of people just by referring that it's climate anxiety. I'm absolutely not trying to dismiss that people feel anxious. It's real. It's a real response. But I guess I would personally be mindful of the language I use, and perhaps try to understand whether climate anxiety, what does it mean for clients, before just kind of using it automatically. But of course, there have been arguments that it is a useful social construct that helps to name specific climate-related distress. And perhaps it might not matter how this emotions conceptualized. What is more important is to better understand how health professionals can respond to it. Another big, I guess, part of literature is around behavioral responses and looking how different emotions are linked to different responses, behavioral. And it's been suggested that hopelessness and despair prevent engagement with pro-environmental behavior. And it can also increase negative affect. But it was concluded that anger is a significant predictor of personal pro-environmental behavior. Also, some people experience apathy and denial and disbelief, and that as well leads to non-eco-friendly behavior. But I guess using a psychoanalytic perspective, it could be understood as a psychological defense mechanism against painful emotions, and people might cope by denying or avoiding the problem when the presented situation is too challenging and there are no concrete solutions. And the last part is a little bit to discuss kind of what is a way forward. And I would like you as well to think, what is your response to climate change crisis, and perhaps how do you cope with that? Social scientists have identified a range of coping strategies to climate change, and some strategies are helpful, adaptive, like adapting problem solving attitude and seeking social support, and some are maladaptive, like avoidance, denial, and perhaps unrealistic optimism as well. it's been concluded that engaging in behavioral changes in trying to mitigate and address climate change leads to a better well-being. But the issue is that I guess it depends on individual capacity to make these changes. They're highly contextual and not always possible for people. Also, the problem that is trying to solve or act on your own can seem daunting and scary and actually paralyzing. So there is a need for a shift to more system thinking and community action. And community-based resilience means engaging together, sharing responsibility, and processing collectively, for example, as climate activists do. And as a social beings, our relationship with other people have a powerful and positive effect in helping us to cope with life stresses. So perhaps coming together is one of the coping strategies. And just to make you aware, there are three main coping strategies that have been identified in the relation to climate change. One is problem-focused coping, which means confronting the problem and trying to actively solve it or talk about it, which is high in engagement, but it also high in a negative affect. Emotion-focused coping is around using different soothing strategies and getting rid of negative emotions, which is low in behavioral engagement, but still high in a negative affect. And third strategy is meaning focused, means it includes a kind of positive reappraisals, acknowledging the stressor, but still being able to reverse one's perspective or find meaning and benefits in a difficult situation, and perhaps turning to more spiritual beliefs. And this type of coping is linked to higher environmental engagement and also better life satisfaction. So what can we do as psychological professionals? I guess first, becoming climate aware, educating ourselves about different impacts, understanding that it's not only those who suffer from the direct exposure might need psychological help. Being able to, also educate, but also being able to have conversations about climate crisis. I guess similarly, as we work in a culturally sensitive way, why can't we become culturally aware, climate aware as well? Seek a more balanced climate information. It can feel overwhelming and lead to disengagement if you are always exposed to negative and panic-driven information. So it is also important to look for more hopeful information, fostering hope that then will help you to act and feel motivated to do so. Perhaps as a psychological professions, we can use our privilege to speak up and become climate advocates, be good role models, and as Ryan was telling us, engage with NHS Trust to help meet policy target of net zero, and also, I think, become aware of our own responses and beliefs around climate change, process our own feelings. I think as a therapist to have, you need to have faced your own grief about climate to be able to hold spaces for others. Otherwise, it's just, too painful. Further, we could develop environmentally aware practice, supervision, training, which means being curious and attentive to what people might bring in the room. Perhaps it is appropriate to incorporate environmental factors into assessment and formulation, as we do, for example, with culture or family context. We should also consider external environment and how that might impact our clients. Acknowledge and validate experiences, providing non-judgmental space to explore emotions, to really take clients' distress about ecological crisis seriously, and perhaps not challenge client thoughts or describe their thinking as catastrophic, because from my personal kind of from interviews that I've done with some of my participants, they were kind of put off from going to have, for example, CBT, because they felt like their thinking, their emotions were challenged and not understood. So if we do use CBT, perhaps we need to be mindful and adapt it. Also create space for collective reflections and processing of experiences. I think it's a little bit different from classical therapy, where perhaps here we can share as therapists, as psychologists, we can share, me too, I am also experiencing some emotions about climate change. We'll feel it collectively. So perhaps more self-disclosure to show attunement to our clients is welcomed. And use non-pathologizing approach, being mindful of the language, as I mentioned before. Have a discussion with clients of how to approach information in a more sustainable way. And also help clients to move from paralysis into action by perhaps exploring their avoidance and maintenance cycles. That might help to disentangle how climate crisis might be triggering their maladaptive coping, and together think about more helpful responses. Also, fear can produce freeze response, and action can be antidote to that. So maybe helping to brainstorm what kind of actions they can take by engaging in SMART goals, and also going beyond the doing mode and foster hope. Is that, I mean, kind of only being outcome focused might lead to despair, and just sometimes highlighting that having hope doesn't mean arriving at a certain outcome in the future. It's more a way of being rather than a destination. And it's okay. It's not all black or white. And even in the future, the changing climate, there will be good days as well. So fostering active hope to help clients feel hopeful, motivated, and continue living and acting. So those are, this is as well what I found interesting. Last slide is from Australian Psychological Society, which proposes this acronym, ACTIVATE, and those kind of strategies of acknowledging feeling, creating social norms, talking about it, acting, engaging here now, are all very important. So those are my suggestions, and also the resources that I found useful for future, some podcasts, Netflix documentaries, books, and BPS library also has some literature around climate change. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I don't think we have much time, but I appreciate your attention.
Thank you very much, Mara. I think you know the amount of interaction you've had coming through the chat says something about the way that what you've said has engaged people sat here and encouraged them to share their thoughts and their reflections. We don't have a great deal of time, but nonetheless, is there anything that people do want to ask or to question? Helen's asking for the resource list, which I imagine we'd be able to share, and I assume we will be able to share the presentations after this event if people want to, because I know some people are having trouble with the slides. Sorry about that. Any other thoughts, observations, or questions? I mean, it may be that people just want to digest. Certainly what I would say, Mara, is I think, you know, the questions you're raising about whether using constructs like anxiety is really the right way to talk about how these issues affect us, I think is a really important one. I mean, it really seems that there's potential, you know, there's something about validating distress and understanding that's very real, but actually, you know, is that the right paradigm actually to understand you know, a completely legitimate, understandable, and, you know, important emotional response to a very real problem that exists in the world. You know, the climate anxiety is not a problem that exists in people's heads. You know, it's a problem that actually exists in the world, and the anxiety is a consequence of that is a positive thing in certain ways in terms of being connected. Sarah, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Thank you, Mary. I'm sorry I was a little bit late joining, so I don't know if you covered this at the beginning of your slides, but the end slide you were talking about sort of, I guess, about SMART goals and plans. I'm a climate activist myself and have been arrested and have taken sort of quite direct action. At what point is there a sort of an ethical boundary about how much you sort of share or encourage somebody that doesn't become like a sort of, I guess, our role, that we have power that comes with our role that we might misuse because our passion is great and our concern is great, would be my question.
If I understood correctly, you're asking where is the boundary kind of intersection between climate activist identity and being a psychologist, and how to be in a room with clients. That's a great, did I understand correctly?
Not really. Yeah, you did, and you know, I have power to influence people's goals, don't I, in my job? And we were all aware of that as psychological professions, and I would normally not guide somebody's goals too strongly, but I feel that, you know, I'm less clear on my position in this, and I wouldn't currently I wouldn't do that, but hearing you speak, maybe I should share more, but in a sensitive way, I guess.
Yeah, I feel perhaps you could use your knowledge as an activist to really help and feed into kind of psychological context if clients are distressed by the environment, one of the kind of coping strategies is to be active, and perhaps you can do it, you kind of have an upper hand because you know what to do as an activist. Perhaps you understand what kind of actions are going on. You could sensitively and tentatively just make them aware of what's happening, where they can engage. I think that's only useful. And SMART goal is just one of the tools from CBT that could be used, kind of very measured and controlled way of setting personal goals of action.
Thank you. I still think we have to be aware of the sort of the power that we bring to that in a sensitive way. But yeah, I will definitely consider that. Thank you very much.
I think it's a good question, Sarah, and I think it's an interesting and challenging topic, isn't it? You know, there's probably different ways in which our personal value set and our work as professionals kind of interact, and I think you're right to say we have to be really mindful of those power imbalances and kind of making sure that what we do is based on our understanding of the needs of the person that we're trying to work with. But I think it's a really important dilemma, and probably one that needs more kind of airing and discussion, I would have thought. For now, I'm really mindful of time. What we're going to do now is Mihal's obviously speaking to us after a short break, but Mihal's going to come on before the short break to give us some ideas of how we might use our short break. Sorry, I'm saying short break over and over again, in order that we can come back and kind of engage with what he's going to speak to us about. So I'll hand over to you, Mihal.
Thank you, Bill. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Mayya, and thanks, Ryan, for great presentations. Really interesting. So we're going to have a short break now, and the encouragement is to find a way to connect to nature right now. So to go outside if you can, or if you're indoors to look out the window, or if there's some seen natural objects that you have in the house, or a scene in a picture, whatever, just to spend a bit of time connecting to nature. And you know, I think this topic of climate is a very stirring topic. It's really stirs up a lot of deep feelings for us all. So having that moment just to relax and connect is also a really important part of our ability to cope with some of what we have to cope with. So that's the invitation, to have 10 minutes and come back here at 20 past, and we'll continue from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Michal. So in fact, as it's now 14 minutes past on my clock, why not treat yourselves, come back at 25 past,
25.
Engage with nature. You're allowed also to make yourself a drink and to use any facilities that you might need to use. And we'll see you back at 25 past. And thank you very much again, Mayya, for really excellent presentation.
Great.
I'm admiring your rug, Ryan.
I didn't realize that could be seen.
Sorry.
Yeah, I'm still in a house where my wife is refusing to put the heating on. You know, because we don't want to use gas, and yeah, so I'm sat here with a blanket around my knees to stay warm.
A very fine blanket it looked like too. I've done a similar conversation yesterday where people were raising up their hot water bottles and whatever else they were using to keep themselves warm.
Yeah, indeed.
Chill in the air out there.
Yeah.
Although I have to say, where I am, it's incredibly bright, blue sky day. You know, a beautiful day out there.
Yeah, for me too. Yeah.
Guess we've got a minute before the deadline, so we'll give people a moment to drift back in.
Okay.
Right, Mihal, well, we're in your hands. Choose your moment and feel free to take charge.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for the invitation to come along. And yeah, it's been really interesting to hear the other presentations. So as you went, hopefully you went out and had a moment in nature, and that's the foundational part of what we'll talk about, is this idea of nature connectedness and noticing nature coming back into a relatedness to the natural world. And as one of the key components of what's led us into perhaps the crises that we are facing, both in human and nature's health. So we're going to have a little look at this and talk through the slides. In the chat, I can't see the chat because it's Teams and it's a nightmare, but if there's anything you want to put in about your connection to nature, again, like Mayya really encouraged as well, just to bring nature into the conversation. So it'd be really nice to hear anything you noticed just if you'd managed to go out for a moment. And yeah, and any other questions you have, and I'll pick those up as we go along. So hopefully you can see my slides. Is everything there as far as people can see? Is that, yeah? Yeah.
Looking good to me. Yeah, I hope others can see that as well.
So the title I thought of this maybe would be Nature Connected as the Heart of One Health. So we very much take a position of One Health, and I'll come back to that in a moment and what we're sort of defining that to be, if there is a definition of such a thing. But a little bit about what we'll do. So I represent an organization called Natural Academy. I'm one of the founders of it. And we really explore eco-psychology and nature-based practice. So it's applied eco-psychology. That's really what we're interested in. And we've been doing that for the last 14 years, both from a sort of nature and health perspective, but also ecotherapy and working in sort of longer term relationships with people in nature and helping people to really deepen their connection. So we'll look at what is eco-psychology very briefly, nature connectedness, the crises. Obviously climate crisis is a major part of this, but with that, the biodiversity crisis and health crisis that we're in. And then some of the practical things we've been involved in our approach with the NHS, and also a little hint at new nature-based professions, given that this is what this network is looking at the moment, all of these new psychological professions that are starting to emerge. So ecopsychology, it's attributed to a few people, but ultimately Theodore Roszak's book is probably the most famous book in ecopsychology, Voice of the Earth. It's certainly one of the seminal beginnings of ecopsychology as a study. And that was written in 1992, and Roszak became quite a leader in the whole movement. And really it is a movement. It's a movement that's emerged out of the climate crisis, the environmental crisis, and the psychological crisis and deep ecology coming in to meet psychology. So there's been a long development of really disciplines coming together, a very holistic approach, a very integrated approach to psychology. So there's many influences, the indigenous wisdom traditions that are there within the cultures that we live in, and also are part of what is the roots of ecopsychology. All the natural sciences also have a place in it. Ecology, obviously, and modern psychology are really sort of some of the influences. And there is no singular definition of ecopsychology, so it's impossible to really define. It's so vast as a study. But one thing that is interesting is the idea of ikios, or eco, which is really from that Greek word ikios, can mean home or dwelling place. So that's something that we work with at a practical level, like what is dwelling place and what is it to dwell well? And that's an important thing. So you can see we very much begin to look at people from a very systemic perspective. It's not a very reductionist view on being human. It's actually a very broad and systemic, and as broad as you can go, really, very holistic and systemic. And so we see a person very much in the personal, social, and ecological perspective. And so one way we might define it is something like a study of and practices within, or a practice within, the interrelationship of individuals, their human communities, and the rest of nature. So it's a very broad system that we're exploring when we think about ecopsychology and the application of ecopsychology in practice. So it speaks to some of what Mayya was speaking to about really taking that very holistic view when we're considering some of these big questions around the environmental crisis we face. So one of the things we work with a lot is nature connectedness, nature relatedness, and this has a long root into the literature, goes way back into the 50s and 60s, really looking at nature relatedness and also biophilia, and really that understanding that we have an innate connection to nature, that this is something that's very natural for us, and that we have, from that, we are deeply resourced, and also that has been disconnected and may be the primary factor to why we have ended up in some of the crises that we face now of disconnection from nature, and therefore the environmental crisis that could only really emerge from that disconnect. So it's seen as a scientific study. In the UK, the University of Derby is really leading the way with this. There's a lot of research papers coming out, and there's developing institutes there, and there's also in Exeter University, it has a big institute and I've got some references at the end you can look to for some of the research that's been done into this, and then Essex University as well. But it's really about us finding a way to come back into that meaningful relationship with the rest of nature, and actually that we are nature, we're not separate ultimately. And nature connectedness has been shown to really encourage pro-nature, pro-environmental behaviour, which obviously is a very important part of any mitigation that we are looking at for biodiversity crisis and climate crisis, and how we adapt to the changes that are already in place. So, you know, there's increasing amounts of evidence that by helping people to connect to nature, they naturally start to create pro-environmental values and behaviours. And surely that's a simple and effective way to make change at a population level. But obviously the leaders have to also be connected to nature to really help drive that. And it's coming back to this idea of One Health. I mean, when we look at the climate, ecological and health or psychological crises that we face, mental health crisis, for us, there's only one health. And that health includes ourself, our individual health, our social context, and the ecology, the wider environment that we're integrated in. All of them are interconnected. They are all affecting each other, depending how we define it. But basically, you know, the personal experience of ourself is always within a relationship to society and to our environment. We can't help but be in that relationship, and those relationships are affecting us, and obviously affect who we become and our mental health and our physical well-being as well. So we very much see the person as a whole in this very large system, and therefore making changes in any of those parts of the system will affect the person, just as the person changing affects the whole system. So there's this interconnectedness and interdependence that emerges. So we're very much aligned to a holistic systemic view on what it means to be human. But that's a very complex thing. So how do we actually bring practice in? So one of the ways that we've been working, this is from a model called, sometimes just reduced to the Bragg model, which again is from Essex University. Basically, there's a way we could define practice as being nature-focused health in everyday life. So nature just becomes an integral part. Maybe many of us here have that, you know, where nature's just somewhere we go for our health and well-being. It's a natural thing for us to do, but for many people that isn't the case. And so sometimes there's also a need to engage with communities for nature and health, and engage with green spaces, engage with communities themselves to help them come into connectedness to nature or to care for a green space. There's a lot of that happening at the moment. A lot of gardens are being developed, a lot of growing projects that are starting to really engage communities in green spaces or blue spaces being water spaces. So that's another way that we can start to bring in nature-based practice, so more in community engagement. And then we can have more direct interventions, if you like, health and social care interventions. So what's sometimes called green care / blue care, because obviously sometimes it happens by the sea or by rivers or by lakes, is nature-based health and social care interventions. And these are specific interventions, perhaps aimed at a very specific client group. So it could be mental health, it could be physical health, it could be social exclusion, young people, whatever it is. It's a specific group that have a need. And then the final area that we're interested in is more ecotherapeutic services. So we're sort of finding ways to sort of discern the difference between, say, green care services and ecotherapeutic services, so that therapeutic and developmental interventions are core to the ecotherapeutic process. But again, it's within that context of a holistic view of people and nature as one. So we have developed a number of practice models and a number of interventions that we use within that ecotherapeutic frame. So we wanted to focus in on nature well, because that's our particular approach to how we work within the NHS and where we work with nature, health and well-being. So we're not going to look into the ecotherapeutic side so much. And it's a big phrase to say, but it feels important to state it, and I think it matters, is that it's a psychosocial ecological approach to holistic health and well-being. So that's a big, so it's as big as it goes, really. But it means that interventions can happen anywhere in that psychosocial ecological frame. And that ultimately, because of nature connectedness being at the heart of it, it is for people and nature, because we do some very straight conservation actions for nature, because we work a lot with the wildlife trusts and we work a lot with other conservation and environmental organizations. But as we said earlier, nature connectedness by its nature encourages people to take action, even if that's to value nature more and therefore care about it, and or to actually change behavior and be more pro-environmental in their behavior. So we created a model where we have what's known as the 5 pathways to nature connectedness. This is again come out of Derby University. It's come out of a couple of research papers, one called Beyond Knowing Nature. And that's really about how, you know, in order for us to come into relatedness to nature, we need to come into some sort of bonding, some sort of emotional connection to nature. Not just studying it like some abstract thing, but actually remembering we are nature. And then we have a series of interventions. We have the natural self as our model of the personal, social, ecological coming together into an integrated whole. And then we have a standard delivery method. It's just a way that we feel really works when we're working in nature, given the complexities of working in nature. When people, especially when people are used to working in rooms, like most psychology people are, to come out into the natural world is a whole new world, just literally to step into, and having frameworks that can really support the professionals and the participants, we call them, the patients, the clients, is really important. So we have a standard sort of delivery method as well. So we've been offering these developmental trainings, development design, and ongoing supervision and support. So really trying to help nature-based approaches embed in the NHS ultimately, or in conservation work, because conservation work can be really, or you know, even activists can be very focused on protecting nature, but actually, you know, if we're going to actually really make a difference, we have to find ways that it's people and nature together. So really the outcomes are for people, but they also are actions for nature. So some sort of activity of some sort that we're aiming at as well. So one of the things that we're seeking, you were talking about it earlier, Mayya, was about adaptation and coping. And really by taking this approach, or looking at a person in this more personal, social, ecological way, it's really important that we find ways to validate and support individual meaningful experience and realistic hope. So we have a very positive psychological approach. We really want it to be about adaptation towards something that is positive and meaningful. And also, as we pointed out earlier, and I think Mayya pointed to as well, the importance of positive community and engaging with community. Like this is not something we can really face on our own. We have to find ways to come together and find ways to create and facilitate positive change as community. So the work that we were doing earlier with the conservation world, often we're going into communities and we're working with maybe a green space and making a positive difference to that, making it nature rich, and then helping people access it and having meaningful experiences there and health experiences through this growing connectedness to the natural world. So all of that coming together in that personal, social, and ecological process, rather than just trying to focus just on one. It feels really important to take a holistic approach. So when we went into the NHS, we were part of, I suppose, what's an attempt by the NHS to go greener, and it was, you know, shocking as usual to hear the horrendous use of carbon that, you know, the health systems use. I mean, so really finding ways to support this greener NHS is really there for us. But one way we felt really important was resourcing staff, and because we understand the pressures that obviously people working in the middle of the NHS are finding at the moment. Plus we were starting to work during COVID, and there was an added issue there. So we wondered about helping staff go into the green spaces around hospitals and other places. And the other focus we have had is into CAMS and working with young people, specifically because I think that often they're feeling the effects of climate change, and obviously it's their future that is going to be most affected. But also we wanted to see if we could bring nature-based approaches into there. So on the staff wellbeing side, we worked across 5 NHS sites, 52 participants, And yeah, this was some of the things that the cloud from the staff said. And this was from quite simple nature-based interventions, really sort of mindful interventions in nature, taking time. We followed the 5 pathways to nature connectedness, and people got a huge amount from it. And these words came out of quite simple, short interventions. And I think once nature comes into the psychological frame, it brings so much resourcefulness that when people are actively supported to connect to it. And it continued, you know, so even post the experiences, it went on for a month afterwards. There was at least some sort of follow-up to see whether or not people had continued to find nature around them as being a really useful resource for their well-being at work. And that continued. So that was important to see as well. And obviously helping staff access the green spaces, not just for chats and having, you know, a break, and being on their phone, but actually to stop and notice was really important. And that's something that people took a lot away from. They actually stopped to notice the nature around them. And some hospitals have incredible nature. I ran the program at Southmead in Bristol, and I mean, it has a really beautiful garden space now, and quite a lot of woodland that's been rewilding. And we also have a thing called a ranger who we were working with, who are people who are now in the sustainability team, who are greening up and rewilding the hospital space. And so the staff also, you know, it made a difference, simple things, and really helped them to feel like they could take action for their own health and well-being. And that was really important. So then we've also worked in the CAMS. We worked at Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool and Oxford Health. And this is Alder Hey Hospital, which I don't know if anyone's ever been to, but it's amazing. It was designed by the young people. So this has all grown a lot more since then, but it has a green roof, and it has this walkway in, which is a zigzag rather than a sort of concrete ramp. And one of the things we were interested in was, how do we bring nature-based interventions into inpatient? This was inpatient unit in Marlborough House, which some of you might know anyway. And this was a paper that we had published in the Journal of Psychiatry afterwards, exploring how this happened. And we find that it was a really interesting, it was great for the staff. They had an amazing sort of time out, just again for their well-being, to learn. And also we did a multidisciplinary team, which was really important. So we had the psychiatrists, and we had psychotherapists, and we had nurses, and we had support workers. We had the whole team, which was a real investment by Oxford Health. But actually it made such a difference, because then when it went back to the ward, everyone was connected and on board. And we did the same thing at Alder Hey. And this is the community woodland at Alder Hey Hospital in Liverpool. And again, that we did the same thing. We trained the team. There's a various broad multidisciplinary team there. And again, by bringing everyone on board, I think it really made a difference that they could feel that they could bring these services into their work. So we really want to align with what the NHS is, at least some of its agenda, to try and green up and become more of a focus on healthier people, healthy planet. And, you know, we'll see as we develop alongside our trainings and our support systems with the NHS, we're hoping that we can bring it in. And one of the ways I think the NHS could go greener, and then specifically in psychology, is to begin to consider these professions, and to begin to consider a nature, health and well-being professional of some sort, an ecotherapist as a role, and eco-psychologist potentially as well. So that we're really interested in these as emerging roles. And there's certainly our trainings, we're doing quite a few trainings where we lead people along that pathway. And so, yeah, there's some further resources here, which we know we can send out as the as part of the slides, but I think that's probably my time. So I'll just come to an end there.
Thank you, Michal. That's fantastic, and again, some really great kind of thought-provoking examples of work being done. I know that work in Oxford Health, was really valued, is still being talked about, and I think it was being presented, wasn't it, at some sort of conference recently? Because I was talking to David and Mia, who wrote the kind of journal article that resulted from it, and they were presenting that somewhere or other this week. I think, was that this week or last week or something like that?
I think so. Yeah.
So, thoughts and questions, comments about what Mihal's had to say, or potentially about other aspects of what we've talked about today. The chat's been coming in. Tony, you have proved once again to be fantastic value in terms of the amazing range of links that you have up your sleeve to illustrate every aspect of the talk. So I think that's been really, really appreciated. There's loads for people to follow up on there. Anything that people want to contribute or to question or to ask? Are there things that we should have talked about but we've completely missed talking about? Are there things that have been said today that you think you'd have a different perspective on? Ryan?
Yeah, I would actually ask a question. Maybe I should answer questions, but I'd like to ask the experts by experience here whether we really should be doing more to offer this type of therapy, this nature-based therapy, nature-based interventions. I'd really like to hear what they think.
Well, Helen's already almost preempted the question in the chat, but Helen, you've got your hand up, so come in on that.
Yeah, I mean, I put my hand up because I've benefited from one of these projects, as I said in the chat. We have a project in Sussex called the Grow Project, which I think has moved to Surrey now as well, which I did about 5 or 6 years ago, which is obviously you have to have a mental health problem, and you do a season on a farm. It's a National Trust farm, which is that just outside Brighton. So I did a spring season there, and you basically do whatever needs doing. So I was lucky enough to do spring, so I got to do lambing and you clear footpaths of whatever is overgrown on the footpaths. You do green woodwork, so you make the hurdles, the fences on the estate, whatever needs doing, with 12 other people. They made an extra space for me at the time because it's supposed to be 12 people, and they didn't have a space. They made an extra space, so there were 13 of us. And it was just an incredible experience. I didn't really understand the seasons until I did that. I used to hate rain. And then I learned to understand the importance of rain because it was a really dry spring, and the farmer was worried that his sheep wouldn't have any food in the summer if it didn't rain. And because he didn't have any space to store hay, he would have had to slaughter his flock. And so suddenly I understood the importance of rain. I've never had an issue with rain since then. So you kind of suddenly begin to understand the connection, your connection to the earth and nature and everything. And it changed my whole relationship really with nature, and it was just hugely beneficial. And the same for everybody, actually, everybody who did it. It was just really, I mean, also you're with other people who are experiencing the same thing. It's one of the best things that I did, or I've done as a service user. Made a huge difference to me. And I carried on, I stayed on, I volunteered for like the next 5 years. They had a project then where you could carry on and keep volunteering up until COVID, basically. So and huge numbers of us stayed on and did that for a very long time. It won an award, it won a National Trust award for being an innovative, a great project. And I just think it's so much better than just going and seeing someone or getting medication or just going and seeing someone once a week. The benefits, the costs, I guess, I think are much lower. It was funded by the National Lottery for the first however many years, and is now self-funding. It does away days. They do away days for staff as well. It's just such a great thing, and definitely one of the best things I've done, and is always oversubscribed. Always, yeah. Right. So I can't recommend it enough.
So I think that there's an answer, Ryan, and a fantastic sort of advert in a way for those sorts of approaches and what meaning that's had. I'm just seeing the chat. So Claire, you've been sharing something about working outside and working with the man you were working with in an outdoor space. I know I used to work in an inpatient mental health rehab service, pretty barren environment, and I took to walking up the canal side, you know, with the men I was working with, who often were pretty fundamentally disconnected with everything in their world, and actually those walks enabled a connection that we never were able to have, sat in the kind of rather sterile room. There's a question here from Natalie in the chat about adapting nature-based therapy in kind of really dense urban areas. So I think that's a good question. I don't know if people have got any thoughts and reflections on that. And then I can see, Sue, you've got your hand raised, but I don't know if people want to respond to Natalie's question.
I mean, I can come in on that a little bit if you want. Yeah, I mean, I've worked in the centre of London in really sort of high urban environments in small parks. And for me, one of the great benefits of nature-based approaches is that there it is, it's always there, nature connection, you know, nature's always there. Now, it might be going through changes at the moment, but it's there, and there's still moments where we can relax into that. So I think it's more about facilitating, like helping people to come into, now sometimes green spaces are associated with danger as well. And so there's, you know, there has to be a sort of consideration of that as well. But, you know, I certainly think there's no issue with doing nature-based work in the very heart of a city. I think it's actually really important that it's at home and we don't end up going out to nature. You know, we have this idea you have to go out, you have to get out of the city to go to nature. Actually, there it is. It's always there beside us in the tree, in the park. If you're lucky enough to have a garden, it's in a garden. So yeah, really, so that would be my position. Now, it has to be facilitated and we have to make it accessible.
Yes, but kind of finding those opportunities. Sue, do you want to come in with your question? And then I'm beginning to get a bit mindful of our time.
Yeah, just a reflection, a quick question. I work in Brighton. I'm lucky enough to have heard Mihail recently on the confer training. So I'm really keen that we're promoting more eco-psychotherapy within Brighton. And I'm also wondering whether you have any resources that we could point me to in terms of getting it recognised as a worthy intervention within CAM's outpatients clinic.
Is that to me then? So yeah,
nice to see you. Hi, nice to see you. And I want to also tell you, I've now got a nature table in my therapy room.
Great.
You can't always take it out, so I brought a nature table, and young people are coming in with conkers and feathers, and it's really, really important. But yeah.
Well, Sue, it's a real prime time at the moment, like, because we're just linking up with Cornwall NHS Trust as well, and Alderhay, and then Marlborough House, and we're really looking at trying to get some good evidence on nature-based interventions that could then be sort of put forward for resourcing or for fund, you know, for commissioning. So it might be that you could join in on that discussion. You know, it'd be great to have you in the mix, Sue. I know the work you're doing down there. So just if you want to get in touch, we could maybe have because we want to bring together a bit more of a research base to see what could be seen as really effective nature-based interventions for young people, something that really works. So just get in touch and maybe you could be part of that, the answer to your question.
Brilliant, thank you.
Fantastic, thank you both. Tony, I think it's appropriate in some ways that you come in and have perhaps the final word before I wrap things up. Over to you.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I was just going to make a comment, sort of connecting what Michael's been talking about with some of the earlier stuff that came up with Mara and Ryan about the routes from engaging with nature to realizing this is such a terrible situation we're in and what we have to do about it, that it isn't a distraction from that. Actually engaging with nature is a route towards becoming actually more active and taking a citizen's job here is to try and do something about this situation. So working therapeutically in this way has this double function. It works towards improving people's well-being, but also allows them to become more active and engaged with this problem. You know, that's what I'm keen to people getting engaged, voting and getting actively involved. Yeah, so it's got that good double function, double win.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tony. And I guess we're getting to the end of our time now. So I wanted to say a massive thank you to everybody who's been part of the session and contributing to it throughout. As I said at the beginning, to Robin and Sharon, who helped kind of kick things off, to Lindsay, who's been doing some fantastic work behind the scenes to make it all work technically, and most of all to our three speakers. So thank you, Ryan, Mayya and Michal. I think it's for me, it's been a fantastic event. I think I've learned a lot from it. There's an enormous amount to follow up on, but I think more importantly, it's helped me to reflect, you know, on my connection with nature and actually what that could and should mean for my professional work. And I don't think I've probably thought enough about that connection. So I think there's something really for me to take away, and I hope that everybody will have something they'll take away from the conversation today. As I said at the beginning, this is the first kind of event that we're hosting in this kind of new series from the Southeast PPN. We're going to try and have regular kind of events on different topics. So we're going to send out a link for you to give us some feedback and thoughts about today, and we look forward to hearing about that. And also, you know, hoping to hear what other topics people would be interested to hear about, other topics that connect people who are working in or interested in the psychological professions. And we'll be keeping you posted about what we'll be doing next. So please do come back to us with kind of feedback and comments. And thank you very much to everyone for being part of the event today. Thank you.
Thank you.